Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife request for 20 wild-trapped female sage grouse for translocation to the Yakima Training Center to continue efforts to increase genetic diversity. Game Division Administrator Brian Wakeling and Staff Specialist Sean Espinosa for possible action. The department received a request from the Washington State Department of Fish and Wildlife in cooperation with the Joint Base Lewis McChord Yakima Training Center to capture and translocate 20 female sage grouse from Nevada to the JBLM YTC. This request is in support of a collaborative effort by JBLM YTC, WDFW, and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to continue efforts in conducting genetic augmentation of the JBLM YTC sage grouse population in South Central Washington. The department is proceeding to fulfill this request and seeks the support of the commission. The commission may vote to support the department's action. Mr. Espinoza.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. Sean Espinoza, for the record, Upland Game Staff Specialist with the Department of Wildlife. So I've just got a brief narrative presentation to kind of provide you guys with some background on the translocation itself, what's going on with the habitat up there, some of the genetic work that they have done, some of the monitoring that they have proposed, and then where we actually are proposing to take sage grouse from and what's going on with our sage grouse population in the state. We received the request from Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, and I'm actually speaking on their behalf right now for the most part, and on behalf of the Joint Base Lewis McChord Yakima Training Center. We received the request on August 11th for 20 female sage grouse. And the intent was to provide some genetic diversity to the population that exists there at the Yakima Training Center. They are seeking female-only translocations because they have found that actually our males are 15% smaller than their males, and so they thought that there was a little bit of an inferiority complex there, so they're just going with the females. It is a joint effort between Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, Joint Base Lewis McChord Yakima Training Center, and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. We have provided birds to Washington in the past. We've provided 61 birds along with Oregon in 2004 through 2006. And they recently collected birds from Idaho. They collected 18 birds in 2014 and 2015. Just some background on their populations. They actually have 4 distinct separate populations. They're somewhat connected. They're in South Central Washington. They have the Moses Coulee population, which is an endemic population, and then the Yakima Training Center, which is also an endemic population of grouse in Washington. The other 2 populations that they have are actually started from a translocated source, and they've had some success with that. The Yakima Training Center had a peak population estimate of 421 in 1999. That was the most recent figure that I could find on their population. But in terms of their statewide population, they're estimating right now that they only have 750 birds left. So that makes them one of 2 states that are in a little bit of trouble in terms of their sage grouse populations, North Dakota being the other. They are considered a threatened species in the state of Washington currently. In terms of habitat at the Yakima Training Center, really the greatest threat is conversion from wildfire into cheatgrass. Washington as a whole, you can imagine that conversion to agriculture, wheat fields and so forth has had an effect on sagebrush habitat. So they're limited that way, and less participation in the CRP program has also impacted some populations there. But the Joint Base Lewis McChord Yakima Training Center has designated 77,000 acres of their habitat as a special sage grouse protection area. In terms of genetics, Washington is considered one of the most genetically homogeneous populations across the range, so they're not very genetically diverse. They looked at some DNA sequencing of birds collected prior to the translocations from Nevada and Oregon, and basically found that they were lacking genetic diversity and allelic richness. But then once the translocation was complete, just 4 years later, they were finding that there was evidence, genetic-wise, in terms of some breeding with the Nevada and Oregon birds, which contributed to some allelic richness. Joint Base Lewis McChord is also funded a monitoring program post-translocation, so that's in place. They're working in conjunction with Washington State University, and they do have a research proposal to set forth. In terms of where we were considering providing birds from, let me just first give a little bit of a status of our population statewide. Our trend-like data for Nevada indicates that we're about 19%, we show a 19% increase over last year's figures in terms of male lek attendance, and that's also 15% greater than.
I hate to interrupt you, but I need to check with Reno and see if we've lost them.
Oh, okay.
Reno, can you hear us?
Yeah, we're still in the conference. I don't know what's going on with our screen, but,
Okay.
well, since we interrupted,
Can you hear me, Katie?
I'm really sorry that we can't hear Sean.
Can you hear me now, Katie?
Yeah, that is better. It's just kind of muffled and echoes and, there we go. Yeah, if you can talk, well, it seems like it's up with that side of the room, or the mic's even on that side.
You checked it.
I'll try and speak a little bit louder, Katie.
Thank you.
Okay. So in terms of the statewide population, our trend-like data indicates that we're about 19% greater than we were the year prior. So that's pretty good news, and we've actually had the highest lek attendance we've seen since 2007 in this year. We're considering taking birds from the Montana mountains located in Humboldt County in the north central portion of the county. Lek attendance there is up by about 14%. We do have a 2-day season proposed for that unit this year, Hunt Unit 031, which will be from October 1st through October 2nd. But the bird population does seem to be doing well there, and somewhat has rebounded from the Holloway fire, at least where the habitat remains intact in the Montana mountains itself. We considered some other portions in the northern portion of the state just for logistical purposes for the state of Washington. But we do have 2 research projects ongoing that we did not want to affect. One's in the Santa Rosa Mountains on the east side of the Santa Rosas where it meets up with the Owyhee Desert. And then we also have research ongoing in the Sheldon and Massacre areas of northern Washoe County. So the Montanas seem to be a good fit for taking birds from. And that's all I had.
Thank you, Sean. Any questions for Sean from the commission? Commissioner Drew.
All right, this is the first time we've tried this mic, so hopefully it's working all right. But Sean, just in reviewing some of the information that was provided for support, there was kind of a progress report that you guys provided on the birds that came out of Idaho, and it seems like something that would translate to us. I mean, obviously it's good for sage grouse in the greater range to make sure some of those smaller populations are taken care of, but it seems like some of the lessons learned ultimately are things that we could also benefit from. So maybe you could speak to that, or maybe I'm taking that into a broader context than it should be, but your thoughts would be appreciated.
Sure. And in the past, translocations have been poorly understood overall and not very successful in terms of sage grouse. I think it's less than 5% success, but this one's a little different in terms of introducing that genetic diversity into the population, which can help with things like reproductive success and so forth. So from that standpoint, I feel that that's, a worthy effort. And this has some bearing to a degree on the listing decision as well that came out, and that one of the mantras of the listing decision was to stop the bleeding. And, we don't want to lose 2 states range-wide during, this period of review that the Fish and Wildlife Service is in over the next 5 years. So that's important as well and something to consider. So anything we can do to help these other states in terms of bolstering their sage grouse population, I think is certainly a worthy effort. We've provided birds in the past to Northern California in the Clear Lake area, and that population actually seems to be doing better than just hanging on. So they're, and we're improving techniques in terms of translocation, how we're doing things over time, and I think there's always something, technologically we advance and so forth. So there's always things I think we can do better during those translocations, and we are testing those things.
Thank you, Sean. Commissioner Hubbs.
I had a question, I'm going to try to get close to on this side. In regard to what we've learned, like from some of the bighorn populations, just in regard to sage grouse, are there any disease-related issues that need to be considered at all? I mean, I know from the genetic diversity perspective, it's good to introduce, but we've also learned that sometimes that can be harmful, and to a homogeneous population in Washington, that could be detrimental.
Not from a disease standpoint per se, nothing that we know of, at least at this time. One of the more deleterious diseases that sage grouse face right now is West Nile virus, but that's not something that they would carry from one population to another.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. Any further questions for Sean from the commission? Hearing none, this is an action item. I'll take it out for public comment in Reno. Any public comment in Reno?
No comment in Reno, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Public comment in Elko?
No comment in Elko.
And public comment in Las Vegas? Seeing none, I'll bring it back to the commission. Any further comments, or Commissioner McNinch?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So just another quick question, I guess. So Sean, back in the 0406 translocation, one of the issues that was brought up was concern for sage grouse have a strong site fidelity. And from what I'm understanding, that wasn't as big a concern. The need to improve the genetics kind of overrides the concerns that might be there with regards to their success because of their site fidelity issues when they move them from here to there. Is that true? I mean, is that a good assumption, or?
And one of the things that they did find was that the initial release in year one, there was a lot of dispersal, a lot more movement than there was in year two. And I'm not sure whether that was because maybe there was more yearlings captured in year two, because yearlings tend to move less than adults, trying to look for, the habitat that they're used to. Or whether that was just because there was more individuals in the population, more conspecifics in the area to kind of say, yeah, this is where your nesting habitat is, this is where your winter habitat is, and so forth. It is a bit of a concern, and it's something we face with even the Sharptail project. We see dispersal distances that are pretty large, especially from adults, and what that usually leads to is greater mortality. It's something that you just have to deal with in these translocations. But hopefully there's enough individuals that continue to persist in the population to kind of keep them there, and hopefully they'll be more successful at capturing juveniles rather than adults, which is something they'll probably target.
Thanks.
Commissioner Hubbs.
I know we said that our populations here in Nevada are on the increase. I think you were measuring them by females. Is that correct? I'm trying to remember back to that cover letter that there's a 19% increase measured by
That's
female
male-like
adult.
attendance.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
Okay. So we know the state of Washington. What's the numbers estimated for the state of Nevada, and what does 20 females mean to our population estimate?
So population estimates are becoming more and more understood, but we've gotten a little bit better at estimating male populations. And we estimate right now through some end mixture models and so forth that our male population is around 30,000. And if you assume that we're about, 2 females per male, our estimate is somewhere around 90,000 birds, more than likely. So 20 females out of the population isn't really a huge deal.
That's a lot more than Washington.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we're probably second or third only to Wyoming and Idaho.
I guess we can share.
Further questions, or I'll be looking for a motion on this?
Mr. Chairman, I'd make a motion that we approve the translocation request from the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife for 20 wild-trapped female sage grouse as presented.
I second that.
I have a motion by Commissioner McNinch and a second by Commissioner Hubbs to support the department's action for 20 females for Washington. I'll call for the question. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, motion passes unanimous, 8-0.